My name is Gloria, and I have been working at Longitude Investments for almost 10 years now. I started out as an entry-level analyst, diving into endless financial reports, studying every figure, every trend, proving my competence through sleepless nights and weekends spent behind a monitor in a half-empty office. Gradually, step by step, I worked my way up, earned the respect of my colleagues, gained a reputation as an impeccable professional, a person who is not afraid of difficult transactions and always brings what he started to the end. Last year was the most difficult for me in my entire career. 3 major customer acquisitions, which the company's CEO called transformational, required more than just complete dedication from me. They almost broke me, squeezing out all my strength and making me doubt that it was even possible to find a balance between work and personal life. But when the bonuses fell on the account, the amount of which exceeded everything I had ever earned at one time, I realized that it was worth it. Before we continue, I am very curious. Which country are you from, dear listeners? Write in the comments where you are listening to us from. Enjoy listening. Last Thursday, I was sitting at my kitchen table, holding a cup of already cold coffee in one hand and looking through bank statements with the other. My eyes were running through the numbers, habitually analyzing receipts and expenses, when suddenly it clicked in my head. Between my salary and these bonuses, the amount accumulated was enough to do what I had dreamed of for years: a home for parents. They had been living in their old 2-room apartment on Cedar Street for over 30 years. The eternal roof leak, which the management company promised to fix but never did. The foundation is cracking, sagging from year to year. The heating system was barely working in winter, because of which my mother slept under 3 blankets, and my father wrapped himself in an old wool sweater when he sat in his favorite armchair watching baseball games. I repeatedly offered them to pay for repairs, but each time I received a firm, "Don't waste money on this stuff," in response. I tried to persuade them to move to a new apartment, but they just shrugged their shoulders and said that it was too expensive, and changing their usual life at their age was not the wisest decision. But now I had a chance to make sure they couldn't refuse. I immediately called my realtor friend Diana. "I need a house," I said as soon as she picked up the phone. "Well, hello to you, Gloria," she laughed. "Are you finally tired of your apartment in the city center?" "Not for me, for parents. Something small but reliable, in a safe area, close to shops and hospitals. They need a large yard for Mom's garden and to keep the stairs to a minimum. Dad's arthritis is getting worse." Diana immediately got involved in the work. A week later, she found the perfect place, a 1-story ranch-style house located in Oakwood, a quiet suburb with excellent infrastructure. 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and most importantly, a beautiful garden plot that Mom can turn into a blooming paradise. The cost is $385,000. It's not cheap, but I had the opportunity to pay everything at once, without a mortgage, without loans. I met with the seller on Tuesday and signed the documents on Wednesday. The deal went through quickly because I paid in cash, and within 3 weeks, I had the keys to the new house in my hands. I didn't tell my parents anything. I wanted it to be a complete surprise. On Saturday, I went to my parents for our usual family dinner. My younger sister Anna was also supposed to be there with her husband Mike and their 5-year-old daughter Lily. Anna and I have never been particularly close. We are too different. I have always been practical, purposeful, accustomed to discipline and planning. Anna, on the contrary, rushed through life, changing jobs and apartments without finding a foothold. When I went up the stairs and knocked on the door, my mother opened it. As soon as she saw me, she immediately hugged me tightly, as she always did. "Gloria, you're early today." "I thought I'd help you with dinner." "Then take care of the potatoes." Mom smiled and pushed me into the kitchen. The house smelled of stew and cinnamon, the scents of my childhood, which I always associated with warmth and comfort, despite peeling wallpaper, old furniture, and a ceiling that sagged more and more every year. I looked into the living room. My father was sitting in his armchair watching baseball, rubbing his knees with one hand. "That's my big shot," he chuckled when he saw me and winked. "How is your investment world?" "I'm not complaining," I smiled and kissed him on the cheek. You know, retirement is boring as hell, he continued, shaking his head. Your mother keeps threatening to give me a mile-long to-do list. But what's the point of fixing this old hole? I glanced at him, then at my mother, who was deftly handling the stove, glancing at us from time to time with a warm smile. They didn't even know that in a few days something was waiting for them that would change their whole lives. The doorbell rang, announcing Anna's arrival, and the next second Lily appeared in front of me, beaming with happiness, before literally plopping down at my feet, wrapping her arms around them so tightly that I had to keep my balance slightly in order not to stagger. Mike, as usual, nodded at me silently, without even slowing down, already heading for the kitchen, obviously knowing where Mom keeps the beer. Anna, in her typical style, quickly hugged me, pulled away, and immediately looked at me appraisingly. "Nice blouse," she said, raising an eyebrow slightly, as if assessing its value. "I just bought it at a sale," I lied, without hesitation. There was no point in telling her that it was Burberry, since her reaction would have been the same anyway. Either a mockery about my expensive habits, or another remark that I was spending money on unnecessary things, while she was forced to save on everything. It's been our unofficial competition since I was a kid, and I've been bored of participating in it for a long time. The dinner was ordinary. Mom was cooking, as always, something incredibly flavorful and delicious. Dad was sharing new gossip in the neighborhood, waving his arms and grinning, and Anna, as usual, was talking about her latest job prospect, which this time would definitely work. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask too many questions. I just sat at the table in silence, feeling like the envelope with the documents for the house was literally burning a hole in my purse. I was waiting for the right moment, and when my mom started to clear the plates, I realized that it had come. I stood up and folded my hands in front of me, taking a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I have something for you all," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "but especially for Mom and Dad." Anna immediately raised her head sharply, narrowing her eyes warily. "What is it?" "What is it?" she asked with a slight hint of suspicion in her voice. I didn't answer right away, but instead reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, carefully handing it to my father. "Open it," I said softly. Dad fiddled with the fastener, not immediately coping with the thick paper, but eventually unfolded the documents and began to look through them. Mom, noticing his difficulties, immediately leaned over her shoulder, and her eyebrows gradually began to frown. "What is it?" she muttered, looking from the papers to me. Dad frowned even more, running his eyes over the lines, until finally he raised his head. "Gloria, I don't understand something." I exhaled, holding back a smile. "It's a house," I said simply. "Your house, if you want." Mom and Dad looked at each other, clearly not understanding what I was talking about. "It's fully paid off, no mortgage," I continued, hoping that my words would finally begin to sink in. "It's in Oakwood, not far from the mall and the medical complex. 3 bedrooms, all on the same level, and most importantly, Mom, there's a garden there." The silence was deafening. Mom raised her hand to her mouth, her eyes began to sparkle, and Dad just stared at the papers, as if they could explain what was happening on their own. "Did you buy us a house?" my mother finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," I nodded, feeling my fingers tighten. "You deserve a good place to live, safe, comfortable, one that won't fall apart in a couple of years." I took out my phone and started scrolling through the photos. A spacious living room, a cozy kitchen, a bright bedroom, a well-kept courtyard. Mom couldn't stand it first. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she literally covered her face with her hands, trembling with emotion. After a moment, Dad gave up too. His shoulders slumped a little, and he did something I hadn't seen in my entire adult life. He burst into tears, even though he tried to do it unnoticeably. They both stood up, and without saying a word, hugged me so tightly that I almost lost my balance. I could see Anna's face over their shoulders. Her smile seemed forced, and her eyes were strained. Mike, who had been calmly drinking his beer, covered his mouth with his hand, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "Well, Gloria," Anna finally said, blinking slowly, "this is really something. Congratulations to Mom and Dad." But her congratulations sounded empty, and her smile never touched her eyes. The next morning, I picked up my parents early to show them their new home. Dad was unusually quiet, only giving me quick glances from time to time, but Mom couldn't stop talking. "I still can't believe it's true," she said for the 10th time, clasping her hands in her palms. "Our own house. And Oakwood, of all places," she added suddenly. "Janet from my book club lives there and always brags about how good it is to live there." When we finally pulled up to the driveway, Mom gasped. The house wasn't huge or fancy, but compared to their old home, it was a palace. Red brick with white trim, a cozy porch large enough for 2 rocking chairs, a neatly manicured green lawn, manicured bushes along the facade. Dad kept his eyes on the house, his lips slightly parted, as if he was afraid to believe in the reality of what was happening. "Is this ours?" "What is it?" he finally asked in a low voice. I nodded and handed him the keys. "It's all yours," I said. "Would you like to honor me?" His hand trembled slightly as he inserted the key into the lock and turned it, as if afraid that the door would not budge, or worse, that the whole situation would turn out to be just a dream that would dissipate the moment he crossed the threshold. But the door opened easily, letting us into a bright living room where huge windows let in streams of morning sun, turning the room into a warm, cozy corner filled with soft light. I had instructed the real estate agency in advance to arrange some basic furniture so that the space would not look empty and lifeless. And now there was a small but comfortable sofa, a coffee table, and a couple of armchairs by the window overlooking the neatly manicured front yard. She rushed forward as if she was afraid that the house would suddenly disappear if she didn't touch it immediately. I watched as she ran her hand over the perfectly smooth kitchen countertop, opened and closed several cabinets, checked the water pressure in the faucet, before turning to me with an expression of sincere delight. "Take a look at this space!" Her eyes shone as she slammed her palm on the wide tabletop. "And the dishwasher!" Dad was moving much slower. He walked down the hallway, entering each room in turn, carefully touching the walls and door frames as if testing their strength, as if he still couldn't believe that this house really belonged to them. When he finally reached the backyard, he stopped, put his hands on his hips, and looked at the plot in silence for a long time, assessing it. Mom joined him, already in full euphoria. Her voice was raised, and the words were coming out at such a speed that I could barely keep up with her thoughts. "I'll plant cucumbers along that fence, and over there you can place zucchini." She pointed to the far corner of the property. "And here I'll plant dahlias and marigolds to scare insects away from vegetables. And, right here, a small table with chairs would be perfect for drinking morning coffee." We spent the next hour sorting out each room, and if Dad continued to check everything for reliability, he was especially interested in the water heater and stove, which he carefully examined, shaking his head disapprovingly before finally nodding and saying, "A high-quality item, not like the stuff we had to deal with." "So, when can we move in?" Mom asked impatiently, almost jumping up on the spot. "Whenever you want," I smiled. "Utilities are already connected, and I also paid for your first year of property tax." A week later, I took a rare day off from work to help with the move. Of course, I hired professional movers, but I wanted to be there to support my parents, especially knowing how much Dad hates accepting help, almost as much as he hates change. The movers arrived at 8 o'clock sharp in the morning, and by noon, most of the things were already packed and loaded into the car. To be honest, there wasn't much to save. The parents' old furniture had been worn out for a long time. Many appliances were working on their word of honor, but they still insisted on taking everything with them, as if they were afraid to leave a trace of long years of living in that house. By the end of the day, we were already in the new house, arranging the boxes and telling the movers where to put the furniture. Mom, inspired by all this fuss, rushed from room to room giving instructions, discussing ideas, and making notes on what needed to be bought or redone. Dad, on the other hand, looked stunned. I found him sitting on the porch, his gaze fixed on one point, where the truck with their belongings was slowly moving away. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly, sinking down next to him on the steps. He exhaled as if he had just allowed himself to relax. "Just catching my breath," he admitted, running a hand over his face. "There are a lot of changes today," he continued after a pause. Good changes, but there are still a lot of them. He turned to me, and before I could say anything else, patted my hand. I'm proud of you, Gloria. His voice was firm, but there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes. You did well. Better than I've ever done. That evening, when the movers left and we no longer even had the strength to sort the boxes, I suggested that we just order pizza. Mom didn't argue, and half an hour later we were sitting in the new kitchen, finishing pieces of melted cheese, while Dad was fiddling with the TV settings. What are you going to do with the old house? I asked, watching my mother carefully smooth out the fresh sheets on the bed, as if trying to consolidate the reality of what was happening with this gesture. She sighed, not taking her eyes off her hands. I'll put it up for sale. She paused, as if considering her words. I suppose no one needs him, except for the sake of the land. This area is not what it used to be, I nodded. You might be surprised, although I doubt it, she added with a wry smile. The old neighborhood had really fallen into disrepair. High crime rates, lack of amenities, and unkempt houses in which people lived out of necessity rather than desire. Everything you get for it will be just a small amount. Mom nodded. We're going to need this, she said pragmatically. Property taxes and insurance are higher here, even if you paid for the first year. In the coming months, you will have to get used to the new expenses. I just watched her in silence, realizing that despite all the joy that this new home brought, the transition to a new life was as exciting for them as it was for me. I plunged back into my work, like into a bottomless sea where there were no shores, only endless numbers, reports, calls, and strategies that required impeccable attention and full dedication. The new client who approached Longitude Investments turned out to be a real challenge. His investment portfolio was complex, complicated, requiring deep restructuring, and I was determined to close the deal, knowing that this would be another important milestone in my career. Between late-night meetings, endless negotiations, and strategic sessions that often dragged on until the weekend, there was catastrophically little time for my personal life, and I was able to call my parents only once a week and visit them no more than twice a month. Every time I came to Oakwood, I noticed how the house became more and more a home. My mother had planted her long-awaited garden, as promised, and now she was harvesting early vegetables, proudly showing me neat beds of greens, young squash, and first cucumbers. Dad found something to do by turning the garage into a small workshop, where he began building birdhouses and bird feeders, and then, to my surprise, even put them up for sale at the local farmers market. Both of them seemed happier and healthier than I had seen them in recent years, and looking at this, I felt that all my efforts had not been in vain. During one of our short phone calls, Mom mentioned that Anna often comes over. She brings Lily almost every weekend, she said with obvious pleasure. It's so nice to have them around. Lily loves helping me in the garden. That's great, I replied, trying to hide the slight twinge of jealousy that stabbed deep inside. I was really happy that Anna was spending time with her parents, but I was a little hurt that she was able to do it regularly, while my career took up too much of my time, leaving me unable to be around as often as I would like. Then Mom added in a casual tone, Anna said she might be looking for a new apartment soon. Why? The landlord is raising the rent again, and Mike's working hours have been reduced, Mom sighed. She says it's getting harder to make ends meet. Something in her voice made me wary. Is she implying that she needs money? I asked, maybe more sharply than I should have. No, Mom answered hurriedly. I was just thinking out loud. You know how Anna is. Yes, I knew. Anna never knew how to handle money and did not know how to plan ahead. Every few months, she found herself in another financial crisis that she needed to get out of, and it usually fell to my lot. Well, tell her to call me if she needs help with bail or anything, I said, trying to sound neutral. You're a good sister, Gloria, Mom replied warmly. I wasn't so sure about that, but I tried. 3 months flew by in a blur of meetings, presentations, and endless working nights spent in the office. But in the end, I got the biggest client I was working on, which meant another impressive bonus, even less free time. I called my parents as much as I could. Our conversations were short but warm, and each time they seemed cheerful and contented, telling me how they were gradually settling into their new life. Dad found company among the neighbors by joining a veteran group at a local community center, and Mom was now part of a gardening club where she discussed plant care with enthusiasts like herself. One day, late Tuesday evening, when I finally got out of the office after a 14-author workday, my phone vibrated with a message from Anna. My mom and dad's birthday is next Saturday at 6 p.m. Family and a few friends. Will you? I frowned at the screen. Anna didn't mention the party during our last awkward coffee meeting 2 weeks ago. It made sense, though. Her 2-room apartment was too cramped even for the 3 of them, and her parents' new house had a spacious living room and backyard. Perfect for holidays. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what to give Anna. I knew she didn't like jewelry, wasn't interested in books, and wasn't impressed with spa certificates. In the end, I settled on a high-quality coffee machine that could grind grains and make everything from espresso to iced coffee. Anna was obsessed with coffee, but she always complained about her cheap coffee machine, saying that it turned out either a bitter drink or a watery mess. Saturday came and I drove up to my parents' house just after 6, deliberately taking my time to exhale a little before going inside. There were already cars parked in the driveway and along the street, which indicated that the guests had gathered in full force, and judging by the number of cars, the party promised to be crowded. I took the coffee machine, packed in an elegant box from the passenger seat, made sure that the tape did not crumple, took a deep breath, and entered the house without knocking. It still seemed strange to enter my parents' new house uninvited, even though I did it automatically in my old apartment on Cedar Street. The living room was full of people, mostly relatives I knew from holidays and family gatherings, as well as a few of Anna's friends, whom I vaguely remembered from the rare intersections over the past few years. There was a long table in the center of the room, filled with all kinds of dishes. Mom, as always, surpassed herself in the ability to organize a real feast. A portable speaker was playing in the corner, filling the house with light, unobtrusive melodies, drowned out by laughter and conversation. I immediately noticed Anna. She was sitting at the head of the table, gracefully leaning back in her chair, with a radiant expression on her face, as if she was surrounded by a natural glow of attention. Mike was sitting next to her, holding Lily on his lap, and Anna herself was waving her arms, animatedly telling a story to a small group of people gathered around. She looked confident, pleased, and completely relaxed, as if she was basking in a flood of approval and admiring glances. My parents, on the other hand, stayed away, serving drinks to the guests, but they looked strangely tense. "Gloria!" Mom noticed me first and immediately hurried to me. Her smile was a little strained, and her gaze darted around the room without meeting mine. "You came! Can I get you something to drink?" "No, thanks," I replied, watching her closely. "Your father fried those shrimps that you like. Take them quickly, before they take them apart," she hurriedly added, already turning away to refill someone's glass. Something was wrong. Before I could ask any questions, Mom disappeared into the crowd of guests, leaving me with a vague sense of anxiety. I put the gift with the rest of the boxes and walked around the room, greeting relatives, accepting congratulations on the purchase of the house, which for some reason made me feel uncomfortable. The dinner was organized in the form of a buffet, and I ended up trapped between Aunt Marge and Uncle Pete, who were enthusiastically talking about their recent cruise to Alaska, and I, nodding and smiling at the right moments, periodically glanced at my parents, who were becoming more tense by the hour. Dad was looking at his watch, and Mom was fiddling with a napkin in her hands, as if she couldn't find a place for herself. Anna, on the other hand, looked completely at ease, laughing loudly, clinking glasses with friends, gesticulating animatedly, catching the admiring glances of others. After dessert, a magnificent cake from an expensive bakery, Anna, of course, announced that it was time for gifts. She sat at the head of the table, squared her shoulders, and the guests gathered around, watching as she enthusiastically opened each package and box. She pretended to be genuinely delighted. She gasped, groaned, and thanked each donor with exaggerated warmth. But when it was my box's turn, I noticed a subtle tension in her face. "Oh, it's from Gloria," she announced, smiling tightly before ripping open the package. There was silence in the room for a second as she pulled out the coffee machine and blinked, as if she hadn't immediately realized what it was. "Wow," her voice sounded unnaturally flat. "It's really gorgeous. "Thank you, Gloria." I nodded, but before I could say anything, something unexpected happened. Dad stood up, drawing everyone's attention, and cleared his throat as if he were preparing to make an important announcement. "Barbara and I have something to say." His voice was slightly shaky, but firm. Mom, holding a glass of wine, stood up next to him, her face expressing a mixture of nervousness and determination. "We've been discussing this for a long time," Dad began, looking from the guests to Anna and finally to me, "and decided that—" The feeling of anxiety became unbearable. "We decided to give this house to Anna and Mike." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Deathly silence reigned in the room. The guests exchanged glances, casting awkward glances at my parents, then at me, not understanding what to say. Mom came forward, putting the glass on the table, and finally met my gaze. "We've already signed the documents," she said softly. "Next week, the house will officially become Anna's property." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The air in the room suddenly became thick and heavy, as if the walls were slowly shifting, compressing the space around me, and all I could do was stand and try to digest what I had heard. Anna wasn't surprised at all. She immediately jumped up from her seat, stretched out her arms to our parents, and hugged them. Her eyes glistened with fake or real tears, and her lips trembled with excess of emotion. "Thank you, thank you. This is the best gift in the world," she exclaimed, clasping their hands, and then rushed back into her mother's arms. Mike, who was standing next to her, smiled broadly and then shook his dad's hand as if he had just made a good deal, instead of watching someone give him almost $500,000 in the form of a fully paid house. Relatives and guests exchanged awkward glances, shifting from one foot to the other. They all knew. They knew that I had bought this house only a few months ago. They knew that it was intended for my parents. And now they looked at me with varying degrees of sympathy and confusion. I got to my feet, feeling my knees tremble, and said in a flat voice, although everything was boiling inside me, "Can I talk to you? In private?" My parents hesitated for a second, as if they weren't sure they wanted to have this conversation, but eventually they nodded. The four of us, me, Mom, Dad, and Anna, went into the kitchen, leaving the guests at the table, where they were obviously trying to pretend that nothing unusual was happening. As soon as the door closed behind us, I turned around and asked harshly, "I bought this house for you. What the hell is going on?" Mom, as if expecting a blow, immediately leaned forward. Her voice was soothing but hurried. "Gloria, we really appreciate it, but now it's our home, and we can do whatever we want with it." I stared at her in shock. "You've only had him for 3 months," I exclaimed, feeling the blood buzzing in my temples. "I spent almost $400,000 so that you would have a safe and comfortable place to live in retirement, not so that you could give it away." Dad shrugged, as if he didn't see the problem. "It's not like Anna is kicking us out," he said defensively. "We'll still be here until we figure out our next steps." I froze, trying to figure out if I had misheard. "What are the next steps?" I asked slowly, crossing my arms over my chest. "This was supposed to be your eternal home." Anna came closer, her face expressing false sympathy, but her eyes remained empty and cold. "Gloria, you need to calm down," she said, her voice too steady. "Mom and Dad have made a decision. If you were really generous, you'd be happy for me." She paused for a moment, then shook her head, as if genuinely amazed at my reaction. "I have a family, after all. Lily deserves a good home to grow up in." Anger boiled up inside me, but before I could say a word, Anna shifted gears, her voice becoming reproachful. "By the way, I've helped you a lot over the years." I snorted, feeling my fingers curl into fists. "Helped me?" "Yes," she nodded, her face showing hypocritical patience. "You seem to forget who always supported you when you needed a family, and who helped you when you didn't have time for your parents." I didn't have time to answer because Mom suddenly intervened. "Have you ever helped her?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice suddenly losing all warmth and becoming icy. I recoiled, startled by the change. "You mean financially?" "You were always ready to throw a hand out," Mom continued, her face distorted by something new and unpleasant. "But when did you really interfere in our lives? You bought us a house. So what? How many times have you been here in these 3 months? I was confused. Mom, I'm working. Anna comes in several times a week, Dad interjected, as if he hadn't heard me. She brings Lily, they have dinner with us, they help around the house. I froze, feeling an icy emptiness spread in my chest. Because I'm working, I repeated, but my voice sounded muffled. Someone has to earn the money that pays for all this. Dad just shook his head. If you cared about your sister the way you claim to care about us, you'd buy her a house too, he said. You know, they barely live from paycheck to paycheck. I slowly looked at their faces, his father's stubborn, almost fierce expression, the mother's cold disapproval. And Anna. She stood to the side, her lips slightly curved in a hidden smile, and there was a barely noticeable triumph in her eyes. That's what she wanted. That's why she came so often. That's why my parents now looked at me as a stranger. She won. I took a deep breath and said softly but firmly, "You're right. This is your home, and you can do whatever you want with it." Turning around, I walked back into the living room where the guests immediately fell silent, feeling the tension. I grabbed my purse from the couch where I'd left it and headed for the exit. "Gloria, wait," someone tried to stop me, but I didn't look back. Anna's laughter came from behind me, low and strained. "Well, what a drama," I heard her dismissive voice. I slammed the door. The next morning, my phone rang before I had even finished my first sip of coffee, and the vibration on my bedside table seemed annoyingly loud, as if someone deliberately wanted to wake me up earlier than they should. I stretched, looked at the screen. Rachel, my cousin. I missed the call. 5 minutes later, Aunt Marge called, then Uncle Pete. Everyone wanted to check on me and express their disbelief at what had happened. I didn't answer. Over the next few weeks, my parents called every day. I could see their names on the screen, and I could hear the phone ringing, but I let every call go to voicemail. The messages began with apologies. "Darling, we didn't want things to turn out this way. Let's talk, please. We need you." Then turned into irritation. "You're acting like a child, Gloria. Can you at least call me back?" And then into pure guilt. "Are you really ready to cut us out of your life because of one decision? It's just a house." I listened to every message, every word, every intonation, but I couldn't bring myself to call back. What was there to say? I plunged into my work with renewed vigor. The 60-hour workweek has become an 80-hour workweek. I took clients that no one wanted. I volunteered for business trips, even if they lasted for weeks. Anything to avoid sitting in an empty apartment alone with your thoughts. So 6 months have passed. Autumn turned to winter. I declined an invitation to Thanksgiving. I didn't want to see either my parents or Anna. When Christmas came, I was already planning to fly to Bali alone. Over time, my parents stopped calling so often. Once a week. Then once every 2 weeks. Then almost nothing. One Tuesday evening when I returned from work, took off my shoes right at the door, and went into the kitchen to finally make myself dinner, I noticed something strange in the window. Outside, 2 figures stood against the gray December evening. Mom and Dad, with suitcases at his feet. I froze, thinking for a second that this was an illusion, that my tired brain was just playing tricks on me. But when a few seconds passed and they still hadn't disappeared, I realized that this was reality. They looked old, tired, out of place against the background of the modernist facade of my house, as if they did not belong to this place. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Mom looked at Dad, then back at me. "We need to talk," she said. "Please." I stifled an exasperated sigh, turned around, and motioned them inside. They exchanged worried glances before they crossed the threshold of my apartment. We were sitting in the living room, and the silence between us was heavy, oppressive. Dad looked at the floor. Mom nervously tugged at the hem of her coat, until finally she spoke. "We were hoping that we could stay with you for a while, until we find our own place." I stared at them. "Are you serious?" Dad cleared his throat. "We had to leave the house." I blinked, not immediately understanding. "What?" "Anna and Mike wanted to make repairs," he continued, still not meeting my eyes. There wasn't room for all of us. I stifled a laugh, even though it was literally bursting out. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You gave Anna the house that I bought for you, and now you have nowhere to live?" Mom pursed her lips. "We've rented an apartment," she said, as if trying to explain something obvious, "with the money from the sale of our old house." "And?" "The lease expires next week, and we can't afford to extend it," she admitted quietly. Dad rubbed his face nervously. "I got a job at a hardware store," he muttered, "but they don't pay much there." I shook my head. "No." Mom looked up sharply. "I mean, no," I repeated firmly. "You can't stay here." Dad straightened up, his face flushed with irritation. "You can't just turn us down, Gloria. I bought you a beautiful house." I raised my eyebrows. "You gave it away. It's not my problem to solve." Mom's face twisted. "How can you be so heartless?" Her voice was trembling. "After all we've done for you." I grinned harshly. "What exactly have you done for me lately?" I cocked my head to the side. "Besides throwing my gift in my face and accusing me of not being generous enough." "You're cruel," Mom whispered, and tears filled her eyes. "I'm being realistic," I snapped. "I have already solved your housing problem once. It cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars and brought me nothing but criticism and ingratitude. I'm not going to do it again." Dad tensed up. "Then where should we go?" I shrugged my shoulders. "What about Anna's house?" I asked with a venomous smile. "The house that used to be yours? Which one did I buy for you? Is your beloved daughter sure to find a place for her beloved parents?" They looked at each other, and I felt hesitation. "Anna says," my mother mumbled. "Is there no room because of the renovation?" I finished for her, crossing my arms. I nodded slowly. "Then it's between you and Anna." I stood up and gestured to the door. "That's not my problem." I went to the door and held it open, feeling a tense silence in the air between us. Oppressive, motionless, as if none of us knew how to properly end this moment, stretched out in time like an old, worn thread. They stood there for a long time, looking at me incredulously, as if they were still hoping that I would change my mind, that this was some kind of test, after which I would suddenly change my mind, say that everything was fine, that they could stay. But I didn't change my mind. At some point, Mom pressed her lips together, as if trying to hold back the words that were bursting out. Dad sighed heavily, his shoulders slumped, and finally, they silently packed their suitcases and went out the door without saying another word. I closed the door, double-locked it, and then slowly leaned back against the cool wooden panel, closing my eyes until their footsteps died away outside. After they left, I didn't think twice. I grabbed my phone, found Anna's number in my contacts, and pressed call. She answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was lazily casual, as if she had been waiting for this conversation for a long time and was ready for everything I would say. "Mom and Dad just came to my apartment, hoping to move in with me," I said without preamble. Anna snorted. "Yeah, I know." "They said you kicked them out because of the renovation." She laughed dismissively. "I wouldn't say I kicked you out. We're converting the guest room into a playroom for Lily. They could have stayed, but it would have been crowded." I froze, absorbing these words, and then slowly exhaled. "Besides, it's our home now," she added. "It was supposed to be their home," I reminded him, holding back my anger. Anna rolled her eyes, and I could almost see the gesture. "I don't need another lecture from you, Gloria." Her voice became harsh, irritated. "They gave us the house. The end of the story." I felt something break inside me, but before I could answer, she hung up the phone. I blocked her number right after that. The next day, Rachel called. "Did you hear what happened?" Her voice sounded cautious, as if she didn't know how I would react. "What is it?" My parents moved to a small studio apartment in a less attractive part of the city. I clutched the phone in my hand, but said nothing. My father got a second job as a night security guard, and my mother is looking for a job as a cashier. I closed my eyes. "And they're telling everyone that it's your fault," Rachel continued, her voice sounding disapproving, "that you rejected them in a difficult moment." I grinned without opening my eyes. Let them say what they want, I replied, leaning my hand on the arm of the sofa. I know the truth. What is it worth? I smiled. Enough so that I can sleep soundly at night. Rachel sighed. Most of the family is on your side, she said after a pause. We've all seen what you've done for them and how they treated you. I thanked her, wished her a good night, and hung up. 6 months have passed since then. I haven't talked to my parents or Anna. As far as I know from family rumors, they are experiencing financial difficulties, but they still do not admit that they made a mistake. Anna and Mike are enjoying their spacious house, my gift, my money, my efforts. And at the same time, they continue to scold me from time to time in front of everyone who is willing to listen to them. And I don't care anymore. Sometimes I wonder if I should do something else. Should I have noticed the warning signs earlier? Should I have been less generous? Or is she more persistent in her expectations? But in the end, I know I did the right thing, and having bought the house initially and refusing further manipulation, I'm tired of sacrificing myself for people who couldn't even comprehend this sacrifice. I've learned to say no. Now I often refuse to overwork and do not take on unnecessary projects that do not bring me joy. I signed up for art classes on weekends because I like it, not because it's useful. I joined a group of hiking enthusiasts, and now every Sunday we go exploring new trails outside the city. I'm meeting a new person who values my time and my boundaries, who listens to me, who doesn't demand more than I'm willing to give. I'm going to New Zealand instead of Bali this winter, and I won't be alone.